This is Books and Arts Daily on RN. I'm talking to the Aboriginal artist Bindi Cole. Back in 2011, Bindi Cole was one of 9 people who successfully sued the columnist Andrew Bolt for breaching the Racial Discrimination Act after he questioned their motives for identifying themselves as Aborigines. So you've spoken out against the proposed changes to the Racial Discrimination Act, but in this video, which is called #18C, you are humbling yourself, it seems to me, in front of a bigot. So there's this person in a suit sitting in a chair with bigot on his head on a paper bag, and in you come and you wash his feet. What are you doing?
I think in a sense I'm setting myself free and setting the bigot free at the same time, but potentially even more so myself. I mean, in terms of the laws, I really think that the laws are great as they stand and there's no need to change them. They already protect free speech, and in fact I would question the motivation as to why they're needing to be changed. But personally, I don't want to be a victim of that. I don't want to be beholden to that. I don't want to live in resentment and anger. And so...
Well, we know why they're being changed. The laws are being changed because we have a right to be a bigot.
Right. And as part of the artwork, I actually have the paper bag installed beside it, and everybody can try the paper bag on and take a selfie because
you can exercise your right.
You can exercise your right to be a bigot. I think the law already protects bigots to a certain degree. There's already protections in 18D for people who want to speak publicly about controversial things, including bigotry. But there has to be a line somewhere. And I think the law already protects that line and is great as it stands.
Now, we're filming this. People can watch this interview online.
Yes.
I know your backstory. But there'll be people who look at you now on the video and say, well, she doesn't look Aboriginal.
Well, the court case was never about whether we were Aboriginal or not. In fact, the Herald Sun and Andrew Bolt, at the very beginning of the court case, said they were never contesting that. It was not about that. It was about racial vilification. So as it stands, it's about racial vilification. They're saying they want to change it to be more about that. It already is about that. You're right, I don't necessarily look like the stereotypical Aboriginal person. However, what is the stereotypical Aboriginal person? Is it the person from Central Desert? Is it an urban person? You know, we have to look at a more broad perception of what Aboriginality is today, 200 years on from this country being colonised.
Now, you're also a Christian, I gather, because to wash the feet of someone who you see as a sinner, is that what you're doing? Anyway, that's what Jesus did. Jesus washed washed the feet of his disciples.
Or perhaps somebody who deserves or has a right to redemption, as we all do. Look, I think we all have the capacity to be bigots. We all have the capacity to be mean and nasty. And on the flip side, we all deserve redemption and salvation and forgiveness. And I guess that's what that statement is about.
Now, let's. You've been so busy. I can't get through all the work you've done, Bindi. So let's talk about EH5452. You're an Aborigine, but you're also EH5452, or you were.
I'm also an ex-con.
Yes. Tell us about that.
EH5452 is a video that explores the time that I spent incarcerated. So in my early 20s, I spent a number of years in prison on drugs charges.
In Britain?
In Britain, yep. I wasn't like Chappelle Corby. I didn't import or export or any of that. I was a drug addict myself, and I was selling drugs to support my habit, essentially. And it was the culmination of a childhood and teenage years of trauma. And
You'd had a rough time as a kid.
I'd had a very rough time.
Yeah, I mean, your mum was a user?
My mum was a user. I'd lost her when I was 16, and I'd essentially been on my own since then. Yep. I was already using drugs at that point, so it just kind of all compounded. Until I imploded in some sense. By the time I ended up in prison, I was about 42 kilos, overdosing regularly. I was very much on the way out. I'm in my first year of a 4-year sentence at Holloway Prison in the United Kingdom. I'm meant to be travelling. Well, that was the original idea. On holiday in Holloway. Prison gives a person a whole lot of time to think, reflect.
How did you end up in the nick?
I got caught selling drugs in a nightclub.
All right.
And just prior to that, I had actually called out to God and said, I need help. I knew, it's almost like I could feel death on me, that if something didn't change, and I couldn't change it, I had lost all capacity to do that, I was going to die. And very shortly after that, I'd found myself locked up. And I guess for most people, and I volunteer regularly in prisons today, prison is a very dark place. And that's true for me too, but for me it ended up being the catalyst to the turning point in my life and a very transformative experience.
What a lesson. What a huge life lesson. It is only now that I can appreciate what my mother went through when she came off heroin 10 years ago. I'm so proud of her for that achievement and always will be. And I thank God for giving her the strength to succeed against all odds and for taking that success even further in her life and accomplishing something she always wanted, to write. Just like me, must be where I get it from.
So there you are, reading from your own, prison notebooks and letters and so on. And you've created a lovely set for this. You're sitting on a chair surrounded by blue sky and sort of, it's like a toy room, isn't it, with sort of clouds made of sort of fluffy cotton wool. And
that's right, and it's presented in a cell-like installation, but it's not your typical prison cell. It's probably more like a little girl's heavenly prison cell, and I guess that is all symbolic of the transformation that I experienced. Prison for me was the place where I first began to develop a sense of hope about my future. I first began my journey towards wholeness, and I first encountered spirituality and Jesus and God.
Let's talk about, you've got a solo show at the Shepparton Art Museum, which is called I Am, and there's a work there called 70 times 7. Yeah,
and that's actually a biblical reference again to when Jesus is asked how many times should we forgive, and he responds 70 times 7. It's a video of 7 Aboriginal community members repeating the mantra, I forgive you, over and over until an actual shift of forgiveness occurs.
I forgive you.
As part of my own journey, growing up very angry and resentful and bitter at the world, one of my key steps towards wholeness and healing was forgiveness. As I began to forgive the events and people in my life that had kind of held power over me, I found myself to be re-empowered.
Yeah.
It was never about saying that things were right or that we should forget. It was just about saying that I'm no longer going to be beholden or a victim to these events.
I forgive you.
As that worked for me, I thought, well, perhaps this is something that can work on a greater level within my community, the Aboriginal community, and particularly as we tend to focus more on what resources we can throw at problems, I actually think what's needed is a massive, deep spiritual healing.
I forgive you.
Often that falls on the individual for the responsibility to do that themselves, even though it wasn't their responsibility to be in that position in the first place.
I forgive you.
This is my attempt at putting that message out there and offering people a chance to be set free.
I forgive you. I forgive you. I forgive you.
What are they forgiving?
I don't know. In the process, I spoke to people about my own personal journey, and I was very candid in that. And then I asked them to forgive something or someone or an event. I also spoke about generational trauma and those kinds of things too. But what I never asked was what they were specifically forgiving, because I didn't want to know. I didn't want to add that kind of element to the work. I wanted it to be personal to them and then very subjective to the people who are watching it.
So as you're standing there looking at it, you can think, oh, I see, I might have done this, or I might reject it. I might say, well, you don't need to forgive me, I'm cool.
Yeah, you might get angry, you might get happy, you might feel free, you might want to forgive yourself.
Was it in any way a response to the apology, the Kevin Rudd's apology to the Indigenous peoples of Australia?
I think that it definitely is, on one level, a response to the apology. When people say, I'm sorry, the natural response is to respond and say, well, I forgive you. And in that action on both sides, there is a very freeing element happening there of saying that we're now moving forward from this situation.
I forgive you.